Hello, everyone. I am Nusret. I'll be chairing this next session on consensus. So our first talk is going to be Forget It, Optimal Good Case Latency for Information-Theoretic BFT. And the speaker is going to be Jovan Komatovic from Category Labs. Please take it.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Nusret, for this kind introduction. I will tell you a bit about our protocol that we call Forget It. And in this protocol, what we are trying to achieve is we are trying to achieve optimal good case latency in the information-theoretic setting. So this paper was presented earlier this year at POTSI, and this is obviously joint work with Ittai, Sourav, and Yuval. Okay, so at the very beginning, I want to introduce the Byzantine agreement problem. I'm pretty confident that everyone here is at least aware of it. So Byzantine agreement problem is a distributed problem defined over a set of n processes, right? Each process has its own input. We will also call it proposal. And the goal is for each process to produce its own output, which we will also call a decision. Okay? Now, what makes the problem quite hard is the fact that among these n processes, there are f of them who can behave arbitrarily with the sole purpose of harming the system. So the red guys here are going to be those guys that can do whatever they want. We will call them Byzantine or faulty. And the green guys are the guys that are non-faulty, non-Byzantine. We will call them correct. And they will follow the protocol that we give them exactly. As I will say in a minute, in this work, we want to focus on partially synchronous networks, and we also want to focus on Byzantine agreement protocols with optimal resilience. So that is why throughout this entire talk, we will assume that n is equal to 3f plus 1, which means that up to 33% of all processes can be Byzantine. Okay? In terms of properties, when we formally talk about the Byzantine agreement problem, the first one is obviously agreement, which simply says that correct processes never disagree. And the second one we will call termination, which simply says that correct processes eventually output something. They eventually decide something. Now, the way I define the problem here makes the problem actually trivial, right? We can just decide 0 right away. That is why there is the third property, which we usually call validity, which makes this problem non-trivial by saying that, okay, in some executions, A is an admissible decision value. In some executions, B is an admissible decision value, and so on and so forth. But for the sake of this talk, or at least for now, I will ignore this validity property completely. We will come back to that in a second. Now, as I said, we want to solve the problem in the partially synchronous network. So what does that mean? Well, at the very beginning of our execution, the protocol will be asynchronous, meaning that messages that we send will eventually be delivered, but we do not know when. Then we have some unknown point in time that we call global stabilization time, GST, after which the network becomes synchronous and messages get delivered in a timely manner. Okay, now how do we, and Ling already covered this today, so how do we usually solve the Byzantine agreement problem in partial synchrony? Well, we usually rely on so-called leader-based protocols, where these protocols operate in views, right? Each view has its own leader, and the idea, obviously on the very high level, is that if that leader is correct and the network is synchronous, that leader will drive the entire system towards decision. So we will have some view V at some point, right? And then, as I mentioned, if view V comes after GST and the leader is correct, we will decide. Otherwise, we will simply try again. We will go to the next view, we will elect a new leader, and then we will hope that the new leader is actually a good one, a correct one, and that this new view is a post-GST view. If that also fails, eventually we reach a post-GST view with a correct leader, and that is when we decide. Okay, now, at the very beginning, I said we wanted to study the good case latency of Byzantine agreement protocols. Again, Ling already covered that today, but intuitively, that simply means that we want to ask the following question. Once we reach a post-GST view with a correct leader, how long from that point until every correct process decides? Okay? Hopefully, everything up until this point is clear. Now, and Ling also talked about this today, when we want to talk about this good case latency a bit more formally, We usually do that through the lens of the Byzantine broadcast primitive. So this is a very well-known primitive in the distributed computing field. So again, we have n processes. Some of them are correct, some of them are faulty. And here we have a designated sender whose goal is to actually disseminate its input value to everyone, right? In terms of properties, we again have agreement and termination. Like before, correct processes never disagree. All correct processes eventually decide something, deliver something. But here we will not ignore the validity property, which simply says, if GST is equal to 0, meaning the network is synchronous from its very beginning, and the sender is correct, we are not allowed to decide anything except for the sender's value. Okay? And now, when we talk about the good case latency, we are simply talking about designing a Byzantine broadcast protocol that in all executions in which GST is actually equal to 0 and the sender is correct, we decide as quickly as we can. Okay, great. Ling also today mentioned, and that was actually his work, that we know some impossibility results for this problem. So we know that with optimal resilience, even in the authenticated setting, where you have cryptography, so you can use signatures, you cannot really do better than 3 rounds. Meaning, whatever algorithm you can come up with, measuring from the sender issuing its proposal until everyone decides, you cannot really hope that in all executions in which GST is equal to 0 and the sender is correct, you decide in 1 or 2 rounds. Here I want to mention just one minor thing. So Ling today was talking about 4 rounds. That is because he was taking into account the message delay from the client to the leader. I'm here ignoring that. So clients are not the part of this model. Okay. So at the very beginning, what I want to show is that achieving this optimal 3 rounds good case latency in the authenticated setting with, again, when we have cryptography, we have signatures, is quote unquote easy. So let me demonstrate that because we will actually use that to explain what we try to do in our protocol. So let's say that we have 4 processes. The first one is correct. So what we will do is we will, of course, go back to the classical work of distributed computing, to PBFTs, Tendermins of our world, and we will say, let's actually try to do something like that. Let's try to first disseminate the proposal and then have 2 voting rounds until we decide. So the sender will issue its proposal, broadcast it to everyone. Then we will have the first all-to-all communication round, which is the first voting round. Once I receive a quorum of these vote 1 messages for the same value, I will issue vote 2 message for that value. And then if I receive a quorum of vote 2 messages at the end of the 3rd round of communication, I will simply decide. One important thing to mention here and to note here is that because we are in the authenticated world, we can require that vote 2 messages be justified. What does that mean? That means that whenever somebody gives me a vote 2 message, I can require that that somebody should also provide a certificate of 2f+1 vote 1 messages, proving that it actually received required messages for it to broadcast the vote 2 message. And again, this is, it's super important to know that we are allowed to, we can do this in the authenticated world because we have cryptography. And this is going to be one important point to note when we go to the unauthenticated world. Okay, so I hope that now it's clear that in all executions where GST is equal to 0 and the sender is correct, we decide at the end of the 3rd round, right? The sender broadcasts the same message to everyone. Everyone broadcasts the vote 1 for that value. Everyone broadcasts vote 2 for that value. We all decide and all is great. However, we still need to make our protocol work, so terminate and agree even in executions where GST is not equal to 0 or we actually do not have the correct sender. So that is why after the 3rd round, because in those executions it is completely possible that somebody will not decide by the end of the 3rd round, we will just introduce some fallback path. And this fallback path will be any Byzantine agreement protocol, any black box Byzantine agreement protocol that uses strong unanimity as its validity property. So here we have agreement, termination, and we also have strong unanimity, which says that if all honest guys propose the same thing to the black box, that's the only thing the black box can decide. Now, to complete the construction, what we need to ask is, okay, but what am I supposed to propose to this black box Byzantine agreement primitive? Well, in this authenticated world, again, hopefully this will come as no surprise. What you will do is you will wait for 2f+1 vote 2 messages. I want to emphasize one thing. If from the beginning of your execution, if you do not collect a quorum of vote 1 messages within 2 delta time, you will simply issue a vote 2 message for bottom. You will say, okay, this execution does not seem to be good enough, so let me just vote for nothing. So once I collect 2f+1 vote 2 messages, a quorum of vote 2 messages, I will simply verify if there is at least one vote 2 message backed by a certificate of vote 1 messages. If so, I will adopt that value and I will propose it to the black box Byzantine agreement. Otherwise, if all are for bottom, I will simply go with the bottom to the Byzantine agreement black box. One, again, important thing to note here is that it is impossible to have 2 different vote 2 messages for non-bottom values that are justified. Why is that the case? That is the case because we have the quorum intersection. It is impossible for 2f+1 vote 1 messages for value A to exist and for 2f+1 vote 1 messages for value B to exist, because that would mean that there is an honest guy in between who actually equivocated, and that's not allowed. Okay, so let me now just conclude this part by explaining why this construction is safe. So if somebody decides at the fast path, so at the end of the 3rd round, what that means, they received a quorum of vote 2 messages for some value A. That simply means that everyone will receive at least one vote 2 message for value A. Again, we cannot have 2 different vote 2 messages for non-bottom values which are certified, so everyone will adopt that value A, propose it to the strong unanimity black box, and then the strong unanimity property of the black box ensures that whoever outputs at the end of the black box outputs value A. Okay, I hope that this part was clear, and now I will finally tell you a bit about what we do in this paper. So we now want to move from the authenticated world to the unauthenticated world, so cryptography does not exist anymore. What is it that we are going to do? Well, we are also going to try to design the protocol as some kind of a fast path and then some kind of a fallback after that. And again, one natural thing to try to do is to simply copy the protocol that we had in the authenticated world. So we are going to have the dissemination phase, and then we are going to have 2 voting rounds after that. One important difference here is because we live in the unauthenticated world now, vote 2 messages cannot be justified anymore. So when I give you a vote 2 message now, I cannot prove that I indeed received required vote 1 messages. But everything else remains exactly the same. And now again, I hope that you can see that whenever the sender is honest and we have synchrony from the beginning, we all decide at the end of the 3rd round, right? Everyone receives the same proposal, everyone broadcasts vote 1, everyone broadcasts vote 2, and we collect a quorum. But again, what we must do is we must ensure that the problem is still solved even if this is not the case. So we need to have some kind of a fallback path. How are we going to do it? Again, we will simply copy the authenticated world and say that, okay, let us use any black box Byzantine agreement protocol with strong unanimity. So agreement, termination, and if all honest guys propose the same value, that is the only value that can be decided. Great. Now, finally, we need to answer the following question. What do I propose to this fallback Byzantine agreement box? And this is now the crux of our idea. So if you're going to take away one thing from this talk, I strongly encourage you to take away the following one. Okay, so what is it that we knew in the authenticated world? In the authenticated world, we knew that if I receive a justified vote 2 message, I know that this is the only value that could have potentially been decided. So it's safe for me to adopt it. But in the unauthenticated world, this does not exist anymore. Meaning it is completely possible for me to receive vote 2 message for value A and a vote 2 message for value B. We have no signatures, so I do not know if I should adopt value A or if I should adopt value B. They both look equally good to me, right? So I need to figure out which one of these 2 am I supposed to actually adopt. Okay. But is there something that we can figure out if I actually received two different conflicting vote2 messages? Well, I can figure out that at least one of these two guys is lying. Remember, it is impossible for correct processes to issue two different vote2 messages because of the quorum intersection. It is impossible to have a quorum of vote 1 for A, a quorum of vote 1 for B, because that would violate the quorum intersection in between. So if I received vote 2 for A and a vote 2 for B, I know that one of these two guys is lying. I do not know if it's this guy or that guy, but I know that there is a Byzantine guy among them. So what is it that I can actually then do? Well, I can say, okay, let me wait for one more message, right? I know that there is a Byzantine guy talking to me, so that means that there's somewhere out there must be a correct process who still needs to come to me and tell me what they have. And this is actually going to be a crucial observation for the way we are going to do this adoption strategy at this point. So I can finally tell you what we will propose at this point. So what will I propose? Again, as in the authenticated setting, I will wait for 2f plus 1 vote2 messages. But at this point, what I will do is I will wait for a quote-unquote clean set of 2f plus 1 vote2 messages. What does that mean? A set of 2f plus 1 messages is clean if and only if all messages that are for non-bottom value inside of that set are for the exact same non-bottom value. So if I receive the set of 2f plus 1 vote2 messages, and I have value A and value B inside, it's a non-clean set. So I'm going to wait for more. But once I receive a 2f plus 1 vote2 messages, such that 2f minus 5 are for bottom and then 6 are for V, this is a clean set. And once I actually obtain a clean set, if I see a non-bottom value within my clean set, I'm going to adopt that value, no questions asked. Otherwise, if all of these values are for bottom, I'm going to adopt bottom and propose it to the black box Byzantine agreement primitive. Now, I just want to first tell you why this rule is actually both live and safe. Why is it that I can hope that I will eventually obtain a clean set? Well, we already answered that one, right? Correct processes never disseminate different vote2 messages. So once I hear from all correct processes, I will obtain my clean set, okay? And that eventually happens. Why is it safe? Meaning that if somebody decided on the fast path, everyone is guaranteed to actually adopt this value. Well, again, quorum intersection, right? Quite simple. If somebody decided value V, there is a quorum of vote2 messages for V, which means that in any possible set of 2f plus 1 messages, I will need to see value V at least once. So whatever I adopt must be a safe value. Putting now all of these things together, if somebody decides on the fast path, because of what we just discussed, everyone is guaranteed to adopt that value here, propose it to the black box Byzantine agreement with strong unanimity, and then the strong unanimity takes care preserving that value through the end of the protocol. Now, one important thing to mention here, in the authenticated world, it was impossible for correct processes to propose to the black box different non-bottom values, again, because of the fact that you could not have two different justified non-bottom values. Here, it's completely possible for me to adopt value A and propose, and for Nusret to adopt value B and propose. But whenever this happens, that necessarily means that nobody decided on the fast path, so everything is actually safe. Okay, so this was our little trick that we kind of based our protocol around. However, I want to say that we did much, much more in this paper. So the first thing I want to mention is that in our paper, we actually wanted to prove a strictly stronger notion of good case latency, which we call robust good case latency. I can talk about that offline. But then we also wanted to preserve quadratic messages per view because our protocol is actually a leader-based protocol, not a Byzantine broadcast protocol. We also cared about obtaining constant persistent memory, okay? We also cared about having decent worst case view duration. So if there is a failure, we wanted to minimize how much we are going to lose before we actually go to the next view. And then we obviously cared about optimistic responsiveness, right? OK, so here is a short table, hopefully showing that this combination of properties was not known before this. I want to take a short time here to say that because in this paper we cared about constant storage, we designed this protocol to be a quote-unquote log-based protocol like PBFT or hot stuff or Tendermint, right? What we did after that is we actually achieved very, very similar results by adopting the simplex protocol, which is quite trendy nowadays. But there we are obviously losing on the constant storage. And then we also managed to extend this result to lower resilience. So we have a result of achieving optimal two delta good case latency in the 5F-1 world. And a big benefit there is obviously shaving off 1 round in the good case, but then also reducing significantly the worst case view duration to 4 delta, approximately. Yeah, and that's mainly it. With this, I will conclude. Thank you.
Thanks for the great talk. Are there any questions? OK, so I have one question actually about the 7 delta view length. So is that part coming from the BA box? Because before the BA box, everything is responsive, right? It's like only 3 small delta. That's the optimistic case. And in the best case, we decide at that point. So can you motivate why we have a 7 delta coming from the BA box?
Yeah, so this entire construction with the Byzantine broadcast, you should really forget it before going into the paper, because I just wanted to motivate the main trick that we use to actually design our protocol. So our protocol is a traditional view-based algorithm. So you have a view, you have a leader, the leader does something, and we move on. So we have what you would usually call a view change procedure. And that view change procedure, which is quite different from anything I talked about here, actually incurs 4 delta in the worst case. So that's why you have like 3 delta and then another 4 delta for 7 delta in total, roughly speaking. I'm ignoring some details here. Yeah.
Thanks. Are there any other questions? Yes, we have one question.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk, Jovan.
Thank you.
I want to understand a bit better that could you phrase your contribution in a simpler way, in a one-shot setting, without talking about storage and stuff like that? What would be the...
Yeah. So if you ignored the storage, which was one of the main things that we wanted to achieve, I would say that this is the first protocol that achieves the good case latency with quadratic messages per view. There is, if you actually, it's written here. So there seems to be the PBFT version in the thesis. I tried to read it. I was unable to actually confirm that everything is fine, that achieves the good case latency of 3 delta, but then it disseminates n to the 4 or n to the 3 messages per view. So if you wanted to completely get rid of the persistent storage, then that would be, I guess, the pitch. So we managed to move that to a quadratic.
All right, thanks.
Yes, thank you.
OK, let's thank the speaker again.